we are in a rather chilly London, but what a pleasure, because I'm here to welcome you to an exhibition of old master paintings that will be auctioned here at Sotheby's London on the 8th of December. There are some real treats in store, so do come and take a look. After so much time being unable to travel, having to experience art virtually, it's wonderful to be able to see real paintings in the flesh, and what paintings they are by some of the great masters of Western art, Rubens, Van Dyck, Constable, Turner, as well as a couple of real surprises by one of the greatest female artists of the 17th century. I'm here to take you on a little tour of some of the highlights of the exhibition, which opens in full on the 3rd of December. I'm going to begin in the Dutch Golden Age with a group of works from a single remarkable private collection, which includes expansive landscapes, playful tondi, and a couple of real masterpieces of Dutch flower painting. Now, here to tell me more is Georgina Elliott. Georgina, hello.
Hello.
So, Georgina, tell me a little bit about the fascinating Rachel Reich, who painted, this is one of my favourite pictures in the whole exhibition. Tell me a bit more about her.
Yeah, we're really excited to actually have two pictures by her in the sale, and as you say, she was one of the most famous and highly regarded still life painters of the late 17th and first half of the 18th century, male or female. And actually she really is sort of one of the victims of art history, actually. She was so acclaimed during her own lifetime. Her pictures fetched very high prices. But it's only this year that the Rijksmuseum, for example, has hung one of her pictures in their gallery of honour with the likes of Rembrandt and the other great masters of the Dutch Golden Age.
She deserves to be right up there. I mean, for me, there's Rachel Reich and there's Jan van Huysum, who's immensely famous as a still life painter.
Absolutely.
But she's every bit as gifted. Tell me a little bit about this picture. I mean, when was it painted? How old was she when she painted it?
So Reich lived for a remarkably long time. This picture was painted in 1738 when she was 74. So she'd already been painting for 60 years. She started learning when she was very young. And part of that was because her father, Frederick Reich, was a botanist. So from a very young age, she was exposed to specimens of very rare plants, insects, butterflies. I imagine that bird's nest is something that she would have seen when she was younger and was able to study in great detail. The closer you look, the more details you find, and it's this classic two meanings in these sorts of paintings. It's at once the display of very, very expensive and rare flowers, not all of which would have bloomed at the same time. There's also this sense of a kind of meaning behind it. They're slightly on the verge of
on the verge of their dissolution.
I suppose.
I mean,
so.
it's interesting because people often talk about these sorts of paintings as vanitas pictures. You know, they remind us that the flower is beautiful and yet it fades so fast. But I think she's one of the greatest still life painters who ever lived, and I'm so glad that she's being rediscovered.
Absolutely. This picture actually on a much smaller scale and much more intimate and a much less sort of elaborate composition than the one we've just been looking at. This was once thought to be her last work. She's actually written her age on it, 83. She died when she was 84. So, you know, she was very proud of the fact that she was still painting well into her 80s.
And what a woman. I mean, just amazing. 10 children. Becoming court painter. I mean,
her husband gave up his career in light of her success.
I just think it's a story for our times, that's for sure.
And she always signed with her maiden name, Reich.
Wonderful.
Which also shows, a huge amount of confidence.
So, Georgina, I noticed that a number of pictures that have been consigned from this collection are quite small in scale.
Yeah, they're a really lovely group of cabinet-sized pictures. So they're small enough for you to hold in your hands, read them, a bit like a large postcard.
I love these two Van Goghens,
yes.
Summer and Winter. And two Bruegel the Youngers?
Yes, some Netherlandish proverbs.
And here we are back, I think, with the theme of the seasons. Tell me a little bit about this group of four paintings.
Exactly, so it's the four seasons. We've got spring and autumn here as well. and they're by Sebastian Vranckx, who was an artist in Antwerp, very much working in Peter Bruegel the Elder's tradition, painting subjects which were very, very popular at the time. And these are just so fun. They're full of amazing details.
He's certainly thirsty, this chap.
Yes, and he's rolled up his sleeves and even his trousers, actually. So I think it's this sort of mixture of the broad experience that everyone has of the changes in the seasons, but very specific details as well. I mean, we don't all eat this sort of decorative bread at Christmas, but that takes centre stage.
There's even a wonderful waffle.
Yes, and all the kind of accoutrement of activities. So you've got a Kolf club.
Yes, a Kolf club, and they're playing some kind of Dutch version of Boules on Ice.
Yes,
it's
snowballs.
just, they are, well, all life is here, and look at the sort of the sheer fruitfulness of summer. It's more fruit than you can shake a stick at.
I think you really get the feeling that Vranckx had as much fun painting them as people enjoy looking at them. And they're actually very rare to survive as a set of 4 like this. He did paint lots of different versions of the seasons, but these are the only ones of this design to remain together that we know of.
Thank you so much, Georgina. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
So, now, from the world of the Flemish peasant, we are moving up in terms of wealth and status to the world of the Flemish notary and merchant and his wife. And talk to me about these 2 pictures is George Gordon. Great to see you again, George.
It's good to see you, Andrew.
So, George, tell me a little bit about what seems to my eye to be an absolutely stunning pair of portraits by Anthony van Dyck. Who are the sitters?
Well, they are indeed stunning. You're quite right about that. The sitters are Jacob de Witt, who was a notary in Antwerp, and his wife, Maria Nuzius. In the 17th century, women kept their surnames. And they were painted in about 1628, just after Van Dyck had returned from Italy, when he was at the peak of his powers. He was hugely in demand in those days. He was not only painting portraits like these, he was also painting, drawing, engraving the portraits of fellow artists. He was a man in a hurry, very ambitious, hugely successful. But thank goodness he had to paint really quickly, because that's what he was really good at. And these are painted with extraordinary vivacity. That Van Dyck wetness in the eye, that's absolutely characteristic.
And I'm struck also by the range of colour that there is in the apparently black costumes of the sitters. There's actually a whole world of blacks in there.
There really is, and because of their extraordinary conditions, you can actually, for once, read these blacks and the subtleties within them perfectly. It's well known that Van Gogh said of Frans Hals entirely correctly and accurately that he had 27 shades of black. Well, Van Dyck had at least 20.
I love the fact they were painted just after he'd come back from Italy and just before he's about to be poached for a huge sum by Charles I, and he's going to go and become court painter to the King of England. So he's really a man at the peak of his powers. And I think these pictures demonstrate just really clearly why he was so sought after. Now, George, I've noticed out of the corner of my eye something that I think I have to go and look at with you. Would you join me?
With pleasure.
Not a Van Dyck, but it's an oil sketch by Rubens.
It is indeed. Rubens was the teacher of Van Dyck, but in fact this was painted some 8 years after the 2 portraits we've just been looking at. It's a late oil sketch, but it has all the tension and energy of Rubens's early work. One of the great things about Rubens is he jumps to and fro with ideas all the way through.
This is a sketch in preparation for a larger work.
Exactly. He was given a commission from Philip IV of Spain to decorate Philip's hunting lodge, the Torre de la Parada, which is just outside Madrid. He didn't paint all the large-scale canvases for that commission. At this stage, he had a large workshop, but he did all the preparatory oil sketches. And in this one, he's working out the idea of the canvas that represents Ganymede being taken up to Olympus by Jupiter, or by the eagle of Jupiter sent to bring him up.
You know, the eagle basically represents surely and embodies the lustful Jupiter who is snatching this boy to take him up to the heavens to become cupbearer to the gods. And I actually think that the sketch is a greater expression of the subject than the finished work.
You've just jumped ahead of me. I was about to say the same thing, and we're not the first people to say this. The sketch has much more energy and creative power than the finished work.
I have to say, if I had a desert island object that's in this particular sale, I think this would be my desert island object. I think it's just the essence of Rubens, but it's just so powerful.
I would fight you for it. What can I say?
George, thank you very much. What a wonderful thing. But now, from erotic mythology to a very different world of painting, Dedham Vale, Suffolk, John Constable. And with me here to talk about this wonderful picture is Julian Gascoigne. I just didn't even know of the existence of this painting.
Absolutely. No, this is a really, really important and exciting discovery. We've long known that there's been a missing version of the Glebe composition. It turns out it's part of lot 13 in the artist's studio sale and hasn't been traced since. And we believe that this is it, we found it. This is a composition that was really important to Constable. It had a huge emotional resonance. The house depicted, actually called Church Farm, Constable refers to it as the Glebe, was the living of Bishop Fisher, his great patron, you know, the man who goes on to become Bishop of Salisbury, and in Constable's words, did more for Constable's career than any other in his life. After Fisher dies in 1826, he comes back to this subject, having first sketched the cottage in the 1840s, and produces a series of oil paintings, the first of which is now in the Detroit Institute of Arts and was exhibited by Constable in 1827. And then there are later variations and versions that he builds up to. The end result of which, I suppose, is in the Tate.
And this picture, as we know from the studio sale, lot 13,
yeah,
it was also in the artist's possession at the time of his death, which strikes me as absolutely key, because here we've got a painting by the most nakedly emotional English artist of the entire 19th century, whose whole life is recorded almost as if in a diary through the landscape paintings that he makes. And this is his tribute to John Fisher, whom he loved so dearly. And the more I look at the picture, the more I see a kind of elegy to his dead friend. Everything in it seems to me to speak of life and death. There's the water pitcher, but there's no one gathering water. There's the dead tree stump. There's the tree that seems to be crying tears of leaf into the wind. The whole thing is just, it's absolutely expressionist painting done in the early 19th century.
There's a sort of autumnal feel about the whole thing. But you're absolutely right. I mean, this is Langham Church, which is obviously just across the Vale from where Constable grew up, in an area he knew extremely well. But it's not topographically accurate. I mean, this is not a topographical landscape. This is a memorial to his great friend.
Constable wrote what I think is the most moving single thing anybody wrote about painting in the 19th century. He said, painting is another word for feeling.
Yes.
What a thing to say.
Yeah, famous
at
quote,
that time.
yeah. And it's clear that the picture has been built up in at least 3 separate stages. You know, you can see where the artist's been working wet in wet and then sometimes wet on dry. And it's a picture that's clearly evolved. He's thought about it. He's come back to it. He's adapted things. You know, he's gone in here and he's skimmed back on some of the foliage, and then he's come in and sort of rechanged the highlights and changed the balance of atmosphere. And
such a powerful thing. Now, I understand you, as well as having this, which is, will take some beating, you have a recently reattributed painting by Turner.
Yes, it's very exciting. So in the same style, sort of London bus syndrome, we have 2 rediscovered masterpieces by 2 of the greatest, landscape painters certainly in British history.
Well, let's go and have a look at the painting you're talking about. So, Julian, tell me a little bit about this Turner. This is a picture with an interesting and slightly troubled history.
Absolutely. Well, again, another really exciting addition to the sale. It's less a discovery and more a reattribution. It's a picture that's long been known. Indeed, it has an extremely distinguished provenance. It belonged to a man called Hugh Munro of Navarre, who, as I'm sure you know, was one of Turner's greatest patrons, executor of his will, great friend of the artist. And yet, despite this, it has long had a question over its attribution. And thanks to the benefits of modern scientific analysis and modern scholarship, we've finally been able to put that question to rest.
I think that's what goes to the heart of what makes this such an interesting picture, because On the one hand, you've got a painting made by Turner in his youth in the 1790s, where he's clearly thinking about Richard Wilson and that old tradition of English landscape.
So this is Kilgarran Castle in southern Wales, a site that Wilson had visited and painted on numerous occasions. Turner must have known those pictures, and in his early years, in his early 20s, he goes off to southern Wales, does the classical art tour.
Absolutely.
Very much working in the late 18th century manner of the sublime, and then 20 years later, he's a different artist. He gets the picture back, and he puts a fresh stamp on it.
And what he's saying is, I'm just going to make it more Turner, and I'm going to give it that sense of light and life that I want my work to have.
And this is something Turner did,
which also makes it a kind of monument to the transition in artistic styles that we know as neoclassical and romantic. Down below, it's a neoclassical landscape painting, but Turner gets it back and he makes it romantic. Yeah. So what a wonderful thing. Thank you very much, Julian. Absolutely fascinating.
That's a pleasure, Andrew.
And now, from the wilderness of Wales, I'm travelling north, and what more appropriate painting than this for a December sale, a wintry Oslo scene by Harold Solberg. And to tell me about it, here is Claude Peening. Claude, lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you, Andrew.
Tell me a bit about the rather interesting circumstances behind its creation.
So, Harold Solberg painted this picture in 1909, which makes him an exact contemporary of Edvard Munch's, of course. And I think you can see some similarities between Munch's aesthetic and Harold Solberg's. But the picture was made as a lottery prize to raise money for an artists' association in Oslo called the Kunstnernes Hus, which still exists today.
And to what extent do you think that sense of mission, that desire to help his fellow artists, is reflected in the style and the subject matter of the painting itself?
Well, I think first and foremost one has to look at the picture just as an aesthetic object, and one needs to look a little bit at what influenced Solberg. Obviously the whole romantic tradition, northern romantic tradition of Johann Christian Dahl in the case of Norway, but going back to Caspar David Friedrich is very much present in this picture, in the silhouette of the trees, in the emptiness, and in some of the symbols. And if you look closely at the picture, I think you can read quite a lot of the artist's preoccupations, anxieties, hopes into the composition. So on the one hand, it's quite a lonely, austere scene, an empty house, a bare flagpole, this rather ominous tree hanging over the whole scene. But at the same time, there is this feeling of hope. There's the sun just setting in the background, this lovely orange glow. And so if you look closely at some of the detail, although it's midwinter, you can see the grass starting to push through the snow. And perhaps that too is a symbol of hope at a time when Harold Solberg was still trying to find his feet financially. He was really an artist without a abode.
Which makes it all the more remarkable that he should have gone to all the time and trouble to create this painting in order to give it to what was effectively a charity.
That's it. I mean, I think, he perhaps had not selfish motives, but ulterior motives, which was to help artists, including himself, get, away in the world.
So although the tree has no leaves, the tree is bare, it's a winter tree, there will be leaves, there will be life.
Precisely. It's 112 years old, this picture, but it just feels so modern and timeless. I think that is one of the things that draws people to the aesthetic and made the show at the Dulwich Picture Gallery in 2019 so successful, for example.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it's a very memorable picture, and thank you so much for telling me that fascinating background detail.
Pleasure, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So there you have it, some of the highlights of Sotheby's Old Masters sale here in London. The auction itself will take place on December the 8th, and a great thanks once again to all of Sotheby's experts for shedding so much light on the pictures. But before I go, I'm really excited to be able to give you a sneak preview of one of the absolute highlights of Masters Week at Sotheby's New York next January, a painting by Botticelli called Christ as the Man of Sorrows. Now, I have to confess that until earlier today, I'd only seen this picture in reproduction. So here we are, here it is, Botticelli's Christ as the Man of Sorrows. I think what's most striking about this picture when you see it for the first time is its sheer intensity. Most people, when they think of the name Botticelli, they think of the birth of Venus, they think of Primavera, they think of erotic mythological painting. But this is late Botticelli, and Botticelli in his later years was a very different artist. He was profoundly spiritually serious. Botticelli painted it in 1500. Pictures from that period of his life are extremely rare. That's one of the things that makes this rediscovery so precious, so fascinating. What do we see? We see Christ staring at us. It's an image all about his pain, his suffering. And one of the most touching details in the painting is this halo of angels who surround the head of Christ. What are they doing? They're bearing the instruments of his passion. So the spear with which his side was pierced, the cross on which he was crucified, the scourge with which he was whipped. And I think one of their functions is to remind you that his death wasn't a single event, that it took place on a road to torment, a via crucis. It was part of a journey. And we know that Botticelli was part of a whole group of spiritually intense Florentine citizens who felt that the year 1500 might just mark the beginning of the end of the world, who felt that this was a time of reckoning. Such fears were quite prevalent in Europe in 1500, and they're reflected in other works of art of the time. Dürer painted an image of himself as Jesus Christ, not quite the Man of Sorrows, but it's an image of Dürer trying to incarnate in himself the personality of Christ, the character of Christ, the morality of Christ. Leonardo da Vinci's Salvator Mundi, another full-face representation of Christ standing, confronting us. Those pictures were both painted in the same year as this picture, and I think all of these pictures, and this one especially, conjures up that sense of end time, that sense of fear and fervour. It really is a powerful picture. Now, the exhibition for the December London Old Masters sale will be on display in the Sotheby's galleries from Friday the 3rd of December. If you'd like any more information about specific works of art, please consult the full digital catalogue, which is available online at sotheby's.com. Also, Sotheby's experts will be on hand to help answer any queries, and you can find their details on the website as well. The sale itself takes place on December the 8th at 7 p.m. and do tune in to watch it live. You can find it on the Sotheby's website or indeed on the Sotheby's YouTube or Facebook channels. Thank you so much for watching.